Hi, I'm Lorraine, alcoholic. Okay, I was hoping the announcements would keep going, and then I realized they're still going. So, but anyway, yeah, I've been here. I've been here before, and I know some of you heard me. So I've been thinking, okay, I gotta shake this thing up a little bit. So I'm working on it still. And what I need to tell you before I even get started, there's a few little disclaimers. I need to advise you that I may lie. I may lie just a little bit. Because I've discovered as I chair that I say a lot about what I thought or I felt when I was out there, and I don't know what I thought or I felt. I was drunk. But I like to attach a thought or a feeling to those facts. And so don't pay attention to those. And then the other thing was I'm still only on husband number 6. And I know that disappoints some people, but so that. Okay, so I was born in Detroit, Michigan, to a family they had no alcohol in the house at all. And for years, I would have said they were not alcoholic, but they were, and they were white knuckling it for over 50 years. So my home was a home of anger and secrets. It was rage and secrets. And it wasn't real pleasant, but I did find a lot of comfort in the church. I was raised in the church. And I was a weird kid. I was real skinny and I had dark hair, covered my whole body, and I had a unibrow. And yeah, it was really pathetic. But I found comfort in the church. I had a lot of friends. They were all invisible. They were saints, but they liked me. And so, that's where I survived. Well, when I was 11 years and 9 months, my older brother's older girlfriend, so she was like 16, she introduced me. She sat me down and she told me the facts of life. She gave me a cigarette, and there was a bottle on the table, and I took my first drink. And when I took that drink, I've heard people say, they became tall and blonde, and I didn't. I was still short and skinny and furry, still had the unibrow. But what happened to me when I took that drink was I just didn't care. It's like, I don't care. And for the first time, I didn't care. But the other thing that happened was I quit going to church and I quit praying. I was done because I knew this is not okay, and I didn't want to disappoint God. So if I don't pray, he won't know how disappointing I am. And I spent 21 years doing that, just avoiding God at all cost. And I really wasn't when I went to jail. I was never one. I've thought back and thought back, and I was not one to drop to my knees and pray, God, get me out of this. I'll never do it again, because there was no doubt I was going to do it again. I just couldn't wait to get out to do it again. But anyway, so as I said, this was in Detroit, and there was no alcohol in my house, which left me with a dilemma to get that second day of drinking. And what happened to me was I started working the streets of Detroit. At 12 years old, I was out in the streets getting my drinks. And as a little girl, I had nothing to sell except the little girl. And that's what I did. And I dropped out of school. I was an 8th grade dropout. And my parents never said a word. They never said, maybe you shouldn't do this. Instead, what they did, because my older brother was also drinking alcoholically. So what they did was they just moved us from Detroit, Michigan to San Jose. And that was going to solve the problem. And what that did was it allowed me to find those blonde, blue-eyed guys, and it was like there were a lot of them. And so I was still in the streets. And back then they had drugstores that had pinball machines in the back, and there'd always be a bunch of bad boys back there. And so their motorcycles would be lined up in front of the drugstore, and I would be back there in my little tiny miniskirt doing whatever I needed to do to get drinks. And now my parents start talking. Now they start complaining that I should come home, because they've already moved from across the United States to save me, and I'm doing the same behavior. So now they're getting irritated. And his mother started complaining. So we made the sound decision, well, we'll get married. and then there'll be no problem. We can live happily ever after. So we did. I was 15, he was 17. That was husband number one. And, it was in the 60s. And so there was better living through chemistry, which he discovered right away. And so you drive from San Jose to San Francisco. I'm home and, I'm lonely. And so we made a decision to have a baby and because it would make it better. We were always making sound decisions. And the marriage got really violent. And so, let's have another baby. So I had two boys out of that marriage. And then I had to escape. And I was out in the streets and I didn't know what to do because I had been drinking from the age of 12 and now I got two babies. And so, but I was smart enough. These are my decisions. My alcoholic decisions were quite interesting. And so I knew better than to marry a good-looking 17-year-old broke guy. So I found myself a man that was 40 years older than me, and he had money. And he built me a home, gave me a Cadillac, gave me a daughter. And he also gave me a divorce well, no, he didn't give me a divorce. He threw me out when he found me drunk with his foreman. He didn't like that. So that was husband number two. And then I decided I was going to be like Donna Reed. They had TV shows back then where they had all these women that were keeping it together. And I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to be a single mother who could work and come home to the kids. I got three babies now. I'm, 19? And so I got a job and I moved home with mom. She was thrilled. And now there's four of us move in with her. And I got my first job and it was at a beer bar. And I ended up in the hospital with the doctor telling me that if I continued to drink the way I was drinking, I was going to die. And so I got well, made up my mind I wouldn't drink anymore. Got another job after I got well, and it was at another beer bar. And I was crying one night in my beer. The first night I worked there, I was crying in my beer about how I couldn't drink anymore because I didn't think drinking beer counted. And so I was telling this customer my sad story. And so he said he had something I could do, and I never had to drink again. And so I quit my job. And I went off with him, and we drove up to San Francisco to a gas station. I walked in the men's room. This is what I did. I never questioned it. I never stopped to think, this is not good behavior, Just if a man said, do this, I did it. And so I went into the restroom and I was introduced to the world of hard drugs. And my life spun totally, it was already out of control. I just told you what I was doing. It was already out of control, but that spun me totally out of control. And that was husband number three that took me up to the gas station. And I met husband number four in the gas station because I thought he worked there. And so I kept him in my mind. And so husband number three and I got married and it was crazy. Like I said, we got drugs and we got alcohol, and I am definitely an alcoholic because you throw that other stuff in, and me trying to drink, it was insane. So one night we decided, here's another great decision. We decided at 10:30 at night, it's California. We need to move. And so we made the decision to throw the kids in the car and take off for Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City, it's going to be better. So when we get there, we realize we don't know anyone in Oklahoma City. We have no money. We have nothing. And he was a career man. And so, he went through the skylight in a bar and he fell down, he broke his leg, and he ended up in McAllister State Prison. And I was in Oklahoma City for a full year with my three kids and worked at another bar, lost my kids and came back to California because life was just crazy out there. When I got back to California, I hunted down that man that I had met in the Shell gas station and we got married. Like I said, I had been raised a church girl, so I knew marriage was good and I knew divorce was bad. So when I got sober, I had a lot of paperwork to do because there were no divorces in there. I know. And that's so much work. And So anyway, so I married husband number 4, and with that husband, it was so crazy. We really wanted, I believe I really wanted to have a marriage with him because I would do things like he'd get a job, we'd rent an apartment, we got the kids, I'd go out and buy pots and pans and a broom, and and it was, we were trying to pull it together. But then he would go and bring home on payday, he'd bring home a 6-pack of beer. They sold them in 6s then. And we'd get drunk, and the next thing you know, we're selling the furniture out of a furnished apartment. It would go crazy immediately. So I started getting into a lot of crime, and we made the conscious decision that if we had a baby of our own, life would get good. So we did, and by the time she was due to be born, I had forgotten, I guess, that I was pregnant and gave birth in bed one morning. And the police came in. They were happy to find us. They'd been looking for us a while, and took me to the hospital and took him to jail. And he goes off to Folsom, and I went off to prison. And that's the first time I heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. I had never heard the word Alcoholic Anonymous. I don't think I ever heard the word alcoholic even. I mean, it's not the language that I used out there in the street. So heard over the loudspeaker, AA in the cafeteria Sunday morning. Everybody's going to AA. And one of the girls said, Lorraine, you ought to go to that. I said, what is it? And she told me, it's for alcoholics and, unmanageable lives. And I thought, wait a minute, I don't need that right now. Things are going well. I got my own room, and, things are going okay. And then she told me, she goes, well, they bring in men and cigarettes and donuts and coffee. And I thought, well, so I went off to my first AA meeting to look, eat, drink, and smoke. And I went every Sunday morning for 12 months. I was in there. And I made up my mind that when it was time to parole, I would not take another drink. Definitely. I know it got me there. And I was out, I don't know, maybe a few hours. And I got a beer. And next thing I know, I've got new cases, and I'm back in there and attending those AA meetings again. And this time I started listening. So after the meeting, I would go back to my room and I would write my husband a letter. Now he's in Folsom. And so I'd write him a letter, or San Quentin. I'd write him a letter and I would say, you need to go to those AA meetings. You're an alcoholic. I had checked, found out they had the meetings there. And so when I got out, the life was insane. I was doing the same things again. I got 4 babies. I don't know where they are. I don't know where my 4 children are, who took them, who rescued them. It's not who took them, who rescued them. And, my husband, when he and I finally really were able to talk, he decided to take his own life rather than go back with me, because I wanted to lead him right back through the gates of hell, because I did not know how to live. I did not know how to live in the world. And if you think about it, I mean, I started drinking at 12. And how do you live? I don't know how to do this. And so now I'm totally alone in the world. Absolutely. I have nobody at all. And so I ended up on Skid Row. I was living at the Howard Hotel. The Moscone Center covers it now, I do believe. And I was living at the Howard Hotel, and I think it cost like 50 cents a night, shared the bathroom down the hall. And I'm in my funeral attire, which is a mini skirt and a little tiny halter top, walking the streets of San Francisco. And my parole officer found me, put me in recovery. It was a 9-month recovery program. And after 9 months, I became a drug and alcohol counselor because I didn't want to leave, because I didn't know how to leave. So I hung around that place as long as it could stay alive, but it folded because there were a lot of counselors like me. And I knew I was going out in the streets and I didn't know how to live. So I grabbed another counselor. He had a year sobriety. On his 1 year sobriety, we got married. And that was number 5. And with him, we got a rental house, a car. I got two cars. We got two cars and a dog. And two of my kids came back full time. One was visitation. Life was everything that I could possibly have wanted because, we got all this going. I got job. He got a job. I got laundry. I got grocery shopping. I got PTA. I got Little League. And that was my bottom. I could sit on a curb and suck on a bottle of wine. I could commit crimes all over the city. I could live that way. I knew how to survive. But to be out there in society and to deal with women and men and teachers and neighbors, oh my God, the neighbors. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So I got in my car and I took off to go back to San Francisco to Skid Row, intentionally driving back to San Francisco so that I could just get drunk and give it all away. I don't want it. I can't deal with it. And God intervened. I hadn't prayed to God. I had avoided God at all costs. But that time I know that God intervened because I came to a stop sign 1 block from my work where I just gotten in my car, 1 block. And a man pulled up next to me and he had been a volunteer in the alcohol and drug program that he used to bring meetings, H&I meetings into that program. And he asked me how I was doing. And I said, I am doing so good. I found out I can stay sober without AA. I said that to him because I knew I needed a sober husband if I was going to make it in this world. And so he told me, that he asked me to go out and he said he couldn't have anything to do with a woman who wasn't in AA. And so being willing to go to like to get a husband, I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was the one, you all have seen me in the rooms, I was the one that was very disruptive. I was the one who wasn't wearing enough clothing to cover my whole body, but I'd been down a whole lot. And I was whispering the whole time. I hooked up with another woman who was just like me. And we were whispering the whole time about, have you seen him? Look at him, and I was husband hunting is all I was doing. I was looking for someone to take care of me. I didn't know back then I could marry a woman or I could have doubled my odds. So I was husband hunting the whole time. And finally, they didn't throw me out. And I'm really so grateful. I'm so grateful for old timers that had some kind of patience. Because what they did, instead of throwing me out, they used to say things like, Lorraine, you got to get a sponsor, you need a sponsor. And it's like, all right, what should I find? What should I look for to get a sponsor? And they say, find a woman who has what you want. Well, I told you a guy at the stop sign. Well, he went off and he married someone. I thought, well, she's got what I want. So I asked her, and poor thing, she said, yes, that didn't work out. But anyway, I couldn't get I asked many women, to be my sponsor. And the few that said yes, I never called them. I never talked to them at all. And finally, the old timers at the meetings that I was going to, this was in San Carlos, and the old timers said, Lorraine, we have a meeting that you'd be really, really good at. And they sent me up into the hills and to Cordilleras, with a hospital up there where people took one too many drinks. Because, I knew you could go to jail, get cirrhosis, all these things could happen if you drank. But I never knew that we don't know what drink it is that's going to cross us over into alcoholic insanity or whatever you want to call it, And I found out that night that that's what happens. I ended up going to that meeting for 5 years. I ended up being coordinator of that facility. And today I know that they sent me up there because they wanted me out of their meeting, but it worked, it was okay. And I ended up in H&I for over 40 years. But yeah, I know, huh? And so anyway, when I was 6 years sober, I realized I was going out to drink. I felt it go through my head. I consciously thought about, this is it. I've missed this whole thing. And so at 6 years sober, I found a woman who did the the program out of the big book. I asked her to be my sponsor, and my whole life entirely changed. I mean, it just totally changed. And I started doing the steps, and she was a 3 Legacy sponsor. And I walked out of Cordilleras one night, out of the hospital, and I looked up at the sky and I raised my hands up and I called out to God. And it was the first time I'd called on God since I was, before I was 12 years old. My entire life changed. I no longer asked, I was no longer hunting for a husband because I had found God. And my husband and I moved out of the Bay Area. We moved up to Paradise. And, I've always had a sponsor. My kids came up to live up there. Those kids that I lost, the kids I gave away, the kids that I drugged through my alcoholism. They wanted to come up and live with me. So my 2 boys came up to live there. I was very active in H&I. Like I said, I got into H&I. I was tricked into it and it was fantastic. And as an H&I, okay, first off, living up in Paradise, my youngest son decided he wanted to come up there, and he was trying to get sober, and he was going to NA, he was going to AA, and he was just about to start a Bible study the next day. And I found him on his kitchen floor dead, but from the damage that had been done to him already in his alcoholism and drug addictions. And it was the first time since I got sober. I held my son and I cried out to God, and I felt nothing. It was the first time in my sobriety since I raised my hand like Julie Andrews. And it was the first time I felt no presence of God, nothing. And I knew what I had to do. The whole time I had never I didn't go to women's meetings. I didn't want to hang out with women. I was that girl that had running partners and men and husbands and so I wasn't doing women's meetings, but I knew intuitively, that I need to go to a women's meeting. And I ended up being secretary of a women's meeting up in Paradise because I knew I needed the women to hold me up until I could reach the hand of God again, so, but anyway, so one night I'm chairing a meeting. I was in H&I, like I said, I was general chair, I was literature, I was treasurer. This is amazing, It's like I told you I did all this time in prison. One of the reasons I did it was I had 17 counts because I liked to play with other people's money when they didn't know I had it. And I ended up being treasurer of H&I. And that pink can? All that money came to my house for 4 years. And if you don't think there's a God, I mean, it balanced to the penny, and that is God. Anyway, as general chair, I got to go in several of the prisons and talk. And one night I was in San Quentin and I was talking, and I looked out at all these people and I realized all these men, and I realized that my husband that killed himself, his answer to his alcoholism was to kill himself. And he had sat in that very room. And my brother had sat in that very room at AA meetings, and he was legally blind, and he was out in the streets of Chico right then trying to get a drink. And my baby boy that I had found dead on the floor for alcoholism damage, he had sat in that very room at AA meetings. And in my head, I cried out to God. I yelled out to God, why? Because they were better men than I was a woman. I mean, I did things that are absolutely horrendous, and they were just drunks. And I'd like to say, that guy heard a big booming voice and God gave me the answer. But the reality is there was just a quiet stillness within that said, you do what you keep doing what you're doing. And I've never forgotten that, so I keep doing it. So anyway, okay, that's what it was like and what happened. And now what it's like now. So as my husband and I married husband number 6. And he and I, we're getting older now, it's like, I don't really want to deal with all this adrenaline and stuff. So we just stayed married for 37 years. Anyway, so we stayed married for 37 years and we were up there in Paradise, and it was good. I've always had a sponsor. Like I said, when my one sponsor, my first real sponsor left, just moved away. I got another, I've always had a sponsor. I've always been a sponsor. Always been a sponsor since I started doing the steps. And, but anyway, then, okay. I'm missing all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I think I'm a little tired. I had the privilege of going and visiting with friends today, which is another thing. I never had friends out there, and I have them now. So anyway, we're up there in Paradise. I get a call from my dad, and he's going to pass away. And he never wanted me in Santa Clara County. When I was at the halfway house and I drank, I was in Oakland because the parole board couldn't send me to Santa Clara County because my parents didn't want me there, and they denied that I could stay with them. And now in sobriety, my dad asked me to come and take care of him. And so I'm driving back and forth from Paradise. And every time Dad would start wanting me to make that deathbed promise, take care of your mother, I would leave the room. It's just like, I'm long time sober and I'm leaving the room because I don't want to make that promise, because I have made up my mind that when Dad's gone, my mom's never going to see me again. And what happened was, after Dad passed, I looked down and living up in Paradise, I'm thinking about this woman in Santa Clara that's legally blind. She's an old woman. She's a mean woman. I was a mean woman. And the woman in me that God had made me brought her up there to Butte County and took care of her for 7 years. And it was the hardest thing I ever did. And I really could not have done it without God, because every single day I would pray, please, God, let me be the daughter you want me to be and not the daughter she deserves. And I was the best daughter. I mean, I can look in the mirror and say that was awesome. And it wasn't me, it was God. And so anyway, so my husband and I had to move real quick. There was a fire, which was a devastating time for me, because my entire fellowship, I lived in Paradise for 30 years. My entire fellowship, my sobriety, my friends, my people, my family were all there. And all of a sudden I have to move, and so we moved to Placerville. And when I got to Placerville, nobody knew me. It was the weirdest thing, because everybody knew me. In all of Northern California, everyone knew me because I was in H&I and I was always going places, and nobody knew me in Placerville. And it was the scariest time of my life. We bought a house there. My oldest son is disabled. And the reason we ended up in Placerville is because their daughter, who produces like a rabbit, she's got all these kids there. And so we have a huge extended family up there in Placerville. And my son and his wife, they lost everything in the fire, and they were renters, and he's disabled. And so they went up there and they were couch surfing because they couldn't find a place to live. And so my husband said, well, we'll move up there, we'll buy a house, and when we die, they'll have a house and they'll never be homeless again. And so that's what we did. And 5 days after we moved in there, my husband died unexpectedly. And, and so there was a lot of losses that happened to me at that time. And, well, all these things weren't happening just to me, but there were a lot of losses. And then COVID, and nobody knew me. And it was the most precarious time of my sobriety. I've always been in service. I've always been active. And I didn't know about virtual meetings. I'm up there in the house and I don't know anything. And it was the scariest time I've ever had. It was so scary. I don't think I would have drank. I can tell you, I don't think I would have drank, but I don't think I would have come back to AA. It was so rough on me. And somehow, by the grace of God, somebody told me, Priya Sponsi on the phone said something about, well, there's virtual meetings, and I was able to get back into AA. But when the in-person meetings started, and I'd go into the Cameron Park High Flyers meeting. If you're ever in Cameron Park at noon, come to the High Flyers meeting. There's a bunch of old men and me. And and they would say, is there anyone new? And I would raise my hand and introduce myself. And I did it for the longest until they said to me, Lorraine, we know who you are. And I said, you have to. You have to. I've done enough H&I to know that if I don't stay in the center of the herd, if everybody doesn't know who I am, if I'm not in service, if I'm not doing something, I too could end up in Cordilleras because I had met people up there that used to be in AA. And so now everybody in Placerville knows me because I continued to raise my hand. I accidentally volunteered for general service. And as the alternate DCM, I had never even been a GSR, and I'm suddenly the alternate DCM. And now I'm the DCM. No experience, but it seems to be going well. But, what I can say is, I am so grateful for my sobriety. I am so grateful for my God. I'm so grateful for everybody because when I was out there, I told you what I was. And I mean, it's not easy for me to stand here and open my soul up and tell you the stuff I did. I was a horrible woman. No, I wasn't a horrible, I did horrible things and I was a horrible mother. I drugged my boys. I gave my girls away. I gave them away because I didn't want to take girls into the places that I was hanging out, but I drugged my baby boys. And I work this program a lot. I have a sponsor. I've always had a sponsor. Oh, I can quickly tell you, I got to go back and tell you that when I was 34 years sober, the sponsor I had and I were not connecting at all. And I thought to myself, I don't need a sponsor anymore. I'm 34 years sober, so I don't need one. And I found myself in a meeting and a woman said one thing and the response was the old Lorraine. I didn't think I needed a woman to be accountable to. I never thought a sponsor did anything to me. And I fishtailed out of the Alano Club and sent gravel all over everyone's cars, drove home up Skyway the whole time saying, I'll never go back to AA. It's all been they brainwashed me. And when I got home, I dropped to my knees and I prayed and I said, God, don't let me leave AA. The very next day I'd been working on holding a little mini conference of a tradition study. And the lady that came to do it, I ran up to her at noon. I said, I'm in trouble. I'm in serious trouble. I need a sponsor. She gave me the name of a woman. Once again, my life has just opened up incredibly. I mean, it's like, what I can say is, if you got 20 plus years or something and you don't think you need a sponsor, you could be like me with your ism showing, When I sponsored myself, it was not pretty. So anyway, that's just a little side note there. But, okay, so real quick now. I told you how I treated my kids, the way I drugged those boys through everything. And I did the steps and I made amends. I tried over and over and over to make amends to my kids. But it was hollow. I don't care what Bill Wilson says. I don't care what the sponsor says. I didn't feel I ever made amends to my oldest son. He was the one at 5 years old that I would say, I'm going to run up to the store to get some milk. And I wouldn't come back. And he had to try to feed a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. How do you make amends for that? I mean, over and over, I tried to make amends, but it didn't feel, how do you strip an entire childhood from somebody and then make amends? But when we moved to Placerville and he and his wife moved in with my husband and I, we still lived together. And every single night, I fall asleep in the recliner. and watching TV, and he comes out and he says, Mom, let's make sure I'm alive still. Mom, I love you. I am so happy we're together. I have never been happier in my life. And since I've been there, I feel like I have made amends. I made amends. I never made breakfast for him. I make breakfast. I never made dinner. I make dinner, and that's God. That's God. So anyway, that's pretty much all I got because I'm about to get a 3-minute sign or a thank you. 3 minutes. So thank you very much for having me.